Hi everyone. So today we are going to talk about making quote sandwiches about rhetoric. If you're in an asynchronous class, you can choose to complete the group work portions, but they're not required. All right, so let's start with making sure we understand what rhetorical features are. Remember that these are the moves or devices that authors use when they are trying to persuade their audience using language. So some that we've talked about are things like pathos, ethos, diction, form, repetition, all of those good things. Then we also have talked about the rhetorical situation. So remember that refers to the background information that we need to know in order to better understand a particular piece that we're reading. Usually it deals with things that happen to or around the author and influence them in some way. It might also be general things that the piece clearly responds to. So when you're researching the rhetorical situation, remember that you might need to ask things about the author, such as, who are they? Where did they live when they wrote this piece? What was going on in the area or in the world at the time? Why did the author care about these things? That kind of stuff. For your rhetorical analysis essay, you're going to be writing just one paragraph about the rhetorical situation surrounding the song, speech, or poem you are analyzing. Also, for that essay and for our essays in general, we use this strategy called a quote sandwich to put our paragraphs together. So there are some specific things that I'm looking for when you're writing about rhetoric and when you're writing about the rhetorical situation surrounding your piece. So a complete paragraph includes a topic sentence that makes an arguable claim, which answers whichever question you're responding to. So for the rhetorical situation, you're answering, what is the rhetorical situation surrounding this piece? For all of the other paragraphs in your paper, for the rhetorical analysis essay, you're going to be answering questions like what rhetoric is the author using and how effective is it, right? So you've got the topic sentence. Then you have introductory information for evidence that you're going to include. In that intro, you're going to include things like the name and type of text and the author's name. After that, you should have a signal phrase, a subject and a verb that comes right before whatever outside information you're including. And then you get to the quote or paraphrase that you're using. So this is where we're using outside evidence, right? After that, then we're using an MLA in-text citation, and we're finishing our paragraph with lots of explanation about how and why the evidence we provided supports the claim that we made. So you can see that your evidence, like your quote or your paraphrased information, is sandwiched in between all of your own writing in the form of a topic sentence, introductory information, a citation, and explanation. So when we're writing quote sandwiches about rhetoric, first thing we need to do is make a claim. So when you're making claims about rhetoric, remember that you're answering the question, what rhetoric is being used and how and why is it effective? Your claim should be not super broad, but not super specific, and it needs to be a complete sentence. So for example, let's say I'm making a quote sandwich paragraph about this excerpt from David Sedaris's Me Talk Pretty One Day. My first step is to make a claim. So my claim would be Sedaris uses italics and nonsense words to help readers understand the confusion he feels in the classroom. So that's just an example. Your claim is going to be about, some kind of rhetoric in the song, speech, or poem that you are analyzing. So you might want to take a minute and practice making a claim on your own. I've provided a template here and an example for you. So this example uses a modest proposal. So another example is, in a modest proposal, Jonathan Swift uses ethos effectively in order to convince readers that he has researched this plan for years, establishing his credibility so they believe it's the best plan. So I want you to notice that in these claims, I am naming the particular kind of rhetoric that's being used, and I'm talking about its effectiveness, right? So I'm not just saying Swift uses ethos and leaving it at that. I'm saying Swift uses ethos and here's how and why, right? But it's still just a complete sentence and it's an arguable claim. So if you'd like to, you can let these timers go. You can practice this stuff on your own. I definitely encourage you to do that. Similarly, you can share with your groups in your group text, or if you happen to be hanging out in the library or something like that. All right. So once you have made your claim in your topic sentence, then you're going to start moving into an example that demonstrates the effectiveness of your claim. But before you get to that, you need to introduce your source. So before you're using outside information in your writing, you need to let your reader know that it's coming up and help us understand who's speaking and why we should listen to them. So what does that look like? You need to include two different things. Sometimes you'll need introductory information, and that's going to happen the first time that you use a particular source. So in this case, you should include the name of the author, tell us what kind of text this is, and include the entire title of that text, but only the first time, right? After that, you don't need all of this information there every time. For subsequent introductions, you can just mention the author by last name or you can mention the title. The other piece that you need when you're introducing a source is this thing called a signal phrase, and that just lets your reader know that outside information is coming up. It includes a subject and a verb. So the subject is the person or thing that is completing an action in the sentence, and the verb is the action that's happening, right? Usually these things happen together. The introductory information and the signal phrase can kind of flow together. So for example, in David Sedaris' short story, Me Talk Pretty One Day, he tells us that the teacher asks, right? So in this case, the signal phrase is a little bit longer because he's talking about somebody else who is talking, but you get the gist. All right, so take a couple minutes and practice introducing some evidence for yourself. If you would like to, I've got a template and an example here for you. And then you can share with your groups if you'd like to do that too. So up to this point, you should have understand how to make a claim and then how to introduce evidence. Now we get towards the middle of our paragraph where we are actually including the evidence, right? So you can choose an excerpt from the text that you're looking at that supports the claim you made in your topic sentence. So if I say that Swift uses ethos to convince us that he is a trustworthy and reliable source, then I'm going to look for an example of ethos in a modest proposal, right? Make sure that you're choosing a short quote or a paraphrase, transcribe accurately, and then make sure that you're also prepared to cite after that quote, and we'll talk about MLA citation in just a bit. So I've got examples for you. There are two different ways that you might want to include evidence in your paragraphs. The first one is a direct quote, and this is where you're using the same exact language as the original, and you put that in quotation marks, right? Make sure that the quote fits well within your sentence grammatically. A good way to look for this is to just read the whole thing out loud. So for instance, in David Sedaris' short story, Me Talk Pretty One Day, he tells us the teacher asks, has everybody, and then we've got this nonsense word, right? You can see that it's in quotation marks. It has 3 because somebody else is talking here, so it looks a little bit different. The other way that you can include evidence is by using a paraphrase. And it's important to note that you do still have to have introductory information and a citation, even if you're paraphrasing. So keep that in mind. And the difference between a direct quote and a paraphrase is that direct quotes use all of the same language and they're in quotation marks. A paraphrase happens when I'm summing something up in my own words. So I don't use quotation marks because I'm not using the exact same language, but I'm still borrowing that idea, right? So that would look like this. So notice that I still have all of the same introductory information, and I'm going to add a citation here. So in David Sedaris' short story, Me Talk Pretty One Day, he tells us the teacher asks a question, but he uses a nonsense word instead of real words, so readers can't understand, just like he couldn't understand. So I've got the direct quote over here, a paraphrase over here. So you can choose which way you want to do this. Just make sure that even if you're paraphrasing, you're still including a signal phrase and a citation. So you can go ahead and take a couple minutes and practice this if you would like to, and then share with your groups if you would like to. All right, so now that you have your quote or your paraphrase in your paragraph, it's time for an MLA citation. So anytime you include evidence, it is really important to include that citation so you give the original author credit and protect yourself from plagiarism. Usually, this is going to include the author's name and the page number where the information occurred, because in our class, we use MLA. So the most information you're going to have is a last name and a number, and this comes directly after your quote. So I've got lots of examples here for you. If you use the author's last name in the same sentence, then you do not have to include it in the parentheses. You'll just have the page number. So I wanted to show you an example of that. It is the same for a paraphrase. So you're still introducing, you're still adding the page number where it occurs. When you're citing a song or a poem, you're going to use the author's last name and then the line or line numbers where the things that you are talking about occur. So if that happens on just one line, then you'll put like line 2, for instance. If it happens over several lines, you might have lines 3 to 4. If it happens in line 5 and then again in line 8, you can separate that with commas. So just some quick, tips for MLA citations. Let me know if you have any questions about those. I also gave you an in-text citation flow chart that you can use. So to use this flow chart, you're going to start over here, and it's just going to ask you, are you using a quote or a paraphrase? Yes. Did you use the author's name in the same sentence as that quote or paraphrase? And then if so, then it tells you that you need to include just the page number. If you didn't, then you're going to include the last name and a number. And then it gets into weird situations that happen all the time. So like, what if there's more than one author? What do I do if there is no author? So it'll take you through how to handle those situations. So definitely keep track of this in-text citation flowchart and use it as you continue writing. So I've got another opportunity for you to practice here if you would like to, and to share with your groups. And once you have your citation in there, then it is time to add lots of explanation to your paragraph. So remember to help readers understand how and why the example that you just gave supports your claim. Try to avoid assuming readers see the quote in the same way that you do, and make sure that you are adding lots of explanation here to help drive that point home. So I've got an example here for you. We're still running with that Sedaris example. So remember that this was my claim, right? That he uses italics and nonsense words to help us understand that confusion that they were feeling. Then I introduced it and had a direct quote. I have the MLA citation here. And then I have all of my own explanations. So notice that the quoted portion is really short compared to my explanation. And this is really important for our class in terms of how you're balancing your paragraphs. It's one of the things that I look for. Do you make a clear and direct claim that is focused and on topic? Does your quoted evidence, support that claim? Is it cited in MLA correctly? And then do you have a nice balance between a short quote and lots of your own explanation, so you're not letting that source speak for you? And remember, in this explanation, it's important to stay on topic and to stay focused on how this example demonstrates whatever it is that you said in your claim. So if you've been practicing, now's a great time to practice adding some more explanation after whichever quote you used. So I've given you a template here if you want to use that to get started. And then I've also given you another example here of talking about Jonathan Swift and his use of ethos. All right, important reminders for this section. Remember that aside from your introduction, conclusion, and your rhetorical situation paragraph, all of the paragraphs in your rhetorical analysis essay should be focused on different instances of effective rhetoric in the song, speech, or poem that you're analyzing. It's okay to include multiple paragraphs about the same type of rhetoric, but you should use different examples to discuss different instances of that type of rhetoric, right? So if you want to have multiple examples of, say, pathos, that's fine, but just use different examples from your song, speech, or poem to highlight those different instances of pathos and talk about, why they're effective. And you can and should focus on more than just pathos, ethos, and logos when you're writing those body paragraphs, right? So one instance of rhetoric in each paragraph, but definitely branch out beyond pathos, ethos, and logos. All right, so that brings us to quote sandwiches about the rhetorical situation. So when you're writing the rhetorical analysis essay, you need to have one paragraph where you talk about the rhetorical situation surrounding your song, speech, or poem. So what does this look like? Remember that this is a complete paragraph that includes a topic sentence, and in this topic sentence, you're making an arguable claim about the rhetorical situation surrounding that song, speech, or poem. It should also include introductory information for evidence that you'll include to help you talk about that. And remember that evidence for this paragraph comes from an outside source, not the song, speech, or poem itself. You want to include the name and type of text along with the author's name. Then you'll have a signal phrase that lets us know that the quote or paraphrase from the outside source is coming up, the quote or paraphrase itself, an MLA in-text citation, and then lots of explanation. So what does a claim about the rhetorical situation look like? Let's say that I'm making that quote sandwich paragraph about the rhetorical situation surrounding the David Sedaris piece. My first step is going to be making a claim that mentions some aspect of the rhetorical situation. So in this case, maybe I would say Sedaris actually learned French late in life, so that likely inspired him to write this story. Whatever you decide to focus on is just one aspect of the rhetorical situation surrounding your song, speech, or poem. So you're not going to be able to cover everything in one paragraph, and that's okay. So now's a good time to practice and share with groups if you would like to. Once you've made your claim, then it's time to introduce your outside source. So everyone is responsible for this essay, the rhetorical analysis essay, for finding your own outside source that helps you talk about some aspect of the rhetorical situation surrounding your song, speech, or poem. So make sure that you have an outside source in mind before you get into, creating this paragraph. So in your introductory information, make sure that you include the name of the author, the type of text, and the title. Format the title correctly. So I've got an example. So according to the article, David Sedaris Learning French by Emily Tableau. And then you'll have a signal phrase too, right? So make sure that you are including a signal phrase. So according to the article, David Sedaris Learning French by Emily Tableau, some of it got cut off. It should say, Tableau says, for example. Then you'll have the quote or paraphrase itself. So again, you'll choose a quote or a paraphrase. Make sure you're introducing either one. Make sure that you're also citing either one. So if I wanted to use a quote, then I would say, according to the article, David Sedaris Learning French by Emily Tableau, Sedaris actually learned French late in life and had a rough time of it. So that's the actual quote. And then if I wanted to do a paraphrase, I could just explain it in my own, right? He actually did learn French and experience a difficult teacher. Again, opportunity to practice and share with groups if you would like to. And then remember that you do need to include an in-text MLA citation, and these citations are going to be exactly the same. So make sure that you are including the page number where the quote from your outside source occurs. Also make sure that you are still including a page number, even if you're paraphrasing. So you can practice and share with groups if you're at a place where you are writing this paragraph out. Otherwise, you can skip over that. Explanation is still needed in this paragraph about the rhetorical situation, right? So I've put the claim, the introductory information along with the quote and citation here for you, and then the explanation. So in your other paragraphs where you're talking about, rhetoric and its effectiveness, you're going to be focused on things like ethos or pathos or repetition. In this one paragraph where you're talking about the rhetorical situation, your focus is different and you're helping your reader understand what the song, speech, or poem, in this case, it's a short story, what was it responding to, right? What influenced it and made this thing come about? And how does the outside source help us better understand that thing? So you'll notice that that is what my explanation is focused on, right? So practice and share with your groups if you're at a place where you're writing this out. And a quick recap. So remember that quote sandwiches are paragraphs which respond to some kind of question. They do that by having a topic sentence that makes a claim, introductory information that tells readers the type and title of text that's going to be used as evidence, a signal phrase that leads up to that quote or paraphrase, the quote or paraphrase itself, an MLA citation, and then lots of explanation to help readers understand the connection between the quote that you used and the claim that you made in your topic sentence. Remember that purpose is going to be different depending on if you're writing about the rhetorical situation, which is just one paragraph in the essay, or the rhetorical features, which are all of the other paragraphs in your essay. If you have any questions or you're stuck or you're not sure how to do these or what is involved, feel free to reach out. You can also use all of these handy resources. So our essay packet has resources and directions about the essay. For help finding outside sources, I've got links to your library databases and things like that, depending on which school you're in. You can also always ask your group, ask a tutor, or come by office hours and ask me for help with these things. And there is some super secret extra credit in this slideshow. So if you've gotten this far, you can complete that extra credit and turn it in on Canvas. All right, let me know if you've got any questions. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.